He was just a kid trying to get home. But a brutal biker gang had other plans. What happened next wasn't just justice, it was a reckoning. And the man who delivered it. You won't believe it. The Los Angeles sun, a relentless eye in a hazy sky, beat down on the sprawling suburbs. On a less traveled boulevard in the San Fernando Valley, nestled between a vape shop and a struggling dry cleaner, was a sanctuary of ink and paper, Sunset Comics. It wasn't a modern, brightly lit franchise, it was a relic, a time capsule. The air inside hung thick with the sweet, nostalgic scent of aging paper, a perfume that clung to the towering shelves crammed with decades of graphic novels and single issues in protective plastic sleeves. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light filtering through the grimy front window, illuminating a world of heroes and villains frozen in time. In a quiet corner, away from the front counter, a man stood in stillness. He was a large man, built with the dense, solid frame of a lifetime practitioner of martial arts, yet he moved with a surprising economy of motion. He wore a simple, loose-fitting black linen shirt and dark pants, his dark hair pulled back into its signature ponytail. This was Steven Seagal. He wasn't here as an action star or a celebrity. He was here as a collector, a student of history, his fingers gently tracing the cover of a rare, first-edition manga on Bushido philosophy. Here, amidst the quiet rustle of pages, he found a piece that the outside world seldom offered. The gentle chime of the bell on the front door broke the quiet reverence. A boy, no older than 13, hobbled in, his slight frame leaning heavily on a pair of aluminum crutches. His right leg was encased in a thick fiberglass cast, from his ankle to just below his knee, covered in a few hopeful doodles from friends. He was Latino, with wide, earnest brown eyes that seemed to hold a weight far beyond his years. This was Leo. He moved with a pained determination, his gaze fixed on the shop owner, a kind, balding man named Mr. Chen who was busy sorting through a new shipment. In Leo's hands, clutched with the care one might afford a holy relic, was a single comic book. It was an old, pristine copy of the Fantastic Four #1. A grail. Mr. Chen. Leo's voice was soft, but clear. Mr. Chen looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile. Leo. Good to see you, son. But what happened to your leg? Basketball, Leo lied, a flicker of shame in his eyes. He couldn't bring himself to say he'd been pushed down a flight of stairs by bullies. Listen, sir. I need to sell this. He carefully placed the comic on the counter. My grandpa gave it to me. He said it was special. Mr. Chen's eyes widened as he recognized the cover. He knew its value, and he knew the boy wouldn't be selling it unless he was desperate. Leo, this is a collector's dream. Are you sure? My mom, Leo said, his voice cracking slightly. Her medicine, the insurance won't cover all of it. This is all I have. The door chime rang again, this time with a harsh, aggressive clang. 3 men filled the doorway, blocking the afternoon sun and casting long, menacing shadows into the shop. The man in the lead was a mountain of muscle and menace. His head was shaved bald, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and a grotesque scorpion tattoo coiled around his neck, its stinger aimed at his ear. He wore a worn leather vest, sleeveless to display arms covered in a chaotic tapestry of prison ink and jagged scars. This was Razor Rex. His 2 goons fanned out behind him, their smirking faces radiating a casual brutality. They were here for their weekly protection money. Rex's cold eyes scanned the small shop, dismissing Mr. Chen with a sneer before landing on the comic book on the counter. He sauntered over, his heavy boots thudding on the worn linoleum floor. Well. What have we here? Rex grunted, his voice a low gravelly rumble. He reached a thick, grimy finger to poke at the comic's plastic sleeve. Please don't touch that, Leo said, his fear overcome by a surge of protective instinct. Rex's lip curled. What did you say to me, kid? He snatched the comic, his rough handling making Leo flinch. This looks valuable. Maybe it's a donation to the neighborhood safety fund. That's mine. Leo protested, his voice rising. I'm selling it to help my mom. You can't just take it. Rex laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Can't I? He looked down at Leo's cast, a cruel idea dawning in his eyes. You got a lot of mouth for a cripple. In a sudden, violent motion, Rex shoved Leo hard in the chest. The boy, already off balance on his crutches, tumbled backward, crying out as he hit the floor. His crutches clattered uselessly beside him. Before anyone could react, Rex raised his heavy motorcycle boot and brought it down, stomping directly onto the center of Leo's cast. A sickening crack echoed through the store, followed by Leo's agonized scream. The pain was excruciating, a fresh wave of fire shooting up his already injured leg. From the back of the store, the quiet collector looked up. The Bushido manga was gently placed back on the shelf. The peaceful, meditative air around Steven Seagal vanished, replaced by something ancient and cold. His eyes, now dark and focused, locked onto Rex. He began to move. One of Rex's goons, seeing Seagal approach, stepped forward with a smirk. Stay out of this, old man. This ain't your. The words died in his throat. Seagal's movement was a blur. His hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a fluid, precise motion, gripping the goon's outstretched wrist. With a subtle turn of his body and a twist of his hand, he used the man's own momentum against him, locking the joint in a way that defied anatomy. The goon's face went white with pain as he was forced to his knees, a choked gasp escaping his lips. Seagal didn't even look at the man he'd just neutralized. His chilling gaze was fixed on Rex, who was still looming over the crying boy. Seagal's voice, when it came, was low, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the air with the intensity of a drawn blade. Let go of the kid. The air in Sunset Comics grew thick and heavy, charged with the sudden violence. Rex, his boots still planted near Leo's shattered cast, slowly turned his head. He saw his man kneeling on the floor, face contorted in agony, his arm held at an impossible angle by this stranger in the black shirt. A flicker of surprise, then irritation, crossed Rex's face. He wasn't used to being challenged. Who the hell are you? Rex growled, taking a half-step back from Leo. Seagal released the goon with a dismissive shove, the man collapsing to the floor and cradling his now useless wrist. Seagal's posture remained deceptively relaxed, his hands held loosely at his sides, but his eyes were like chips of obsidian, unblinking and predatory. I'm the guy telling you to walk out that door, Seagal said, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. Now. Rex's jaw tightened. He looked from Seagal to his other goon, who now seemed far less confident. He weighed his options. A public brawl wasn't his style, he preferred intimidation and easy targets. Humiliating a lone man in a comic shop was one thing, but this was different. This man had an aura, a dangerous stillness that set every nerve in Rex's body on edge. He spat on the floor. Whatever. He shot a final, venomous glare at Leo, who was now being helped up by a shaken Mr. Chen. This ain't over, runt. I know where you live. With that final threat hanging in the air, Rex and his men stalked out of the shop, their departure as abrupt and violent as their arrival. The bell on the door chimed mockingly behind them. The tension inside the shop slowly began to dissipate. Mr. Chen rushed to the phone to call for an ambulance, his hands trembling. Seagal knelt beside Leo, his large frame casting a protective shadow over the boy. Let me see, he said, his voice now gentle. He carefully examined the cast. It was badly fractured, the fiberglass splintered right where Rex had stomped on it. Leo winced, tears of pain and frustration streaming down his face. He broke it again, Leo whispered. It's all my fault. No, Seagal said firmly, looking the boy in the eye. This is not your fault. Courage is never a fault. When the paramedics arrived, Seagal spoke quietly with them, then turned to Mr. Chen. He pulled a thick roll of cash from his pocket and peeled off several $100 bills, pressing them into the shopkeeper's hand. This should cover the boy's mother's medicine. And whatever else they need. Don't tell them where it came from. Mr. Chen, stunned, could only nod. As the paramedics wheeled Leo out, the boy looked back at Seagal, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Seagal simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. I've got this. But he knew Rex's threat wasn't idle. Men like that were fueled by humiliation. Their pride was a fragile, violent thing. An attack on it was an attack on their entire identity. Seagal watched the ambulance pull away, then stepped out into the fading afternoon light. He knew he couldn't just leave. The threat needed to be neutralized. He got into his nondescript black muscle car parked down the street and began to follow the ambulance from a distance. After Leo was treated and released from the local urgent care with a new, sturdier cast, Seagal watched as a taxi took the boy and his anxious mother home. He kept his distance, a silent, unseen guardian. Leo's walk home from the bus stop later that evening was a journey through a landscape of fear. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the LA sky was a bruised canvas of orange and purple. Long, distorted shadows stretched from every tree and lamppost, turning familiar streets into a menacing labyrinth. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every passing car made his heart leap into his throat. He clutched his crutches, his knuckles white. He kept telling himself he was being paranoid, but the echo of Rex's voice, "I know where you live," played on a loop in his mind. Then he heard it. A low, guttural rumble. He froze, straining to listen. It was distant at first, a faint vibration more felt than heard. A motorcycle engine. It idled for a moment, then grew slightly louder. Leo quickened his pace, his crutches thumping a frantic rhythm on the cracked sidewalk. He turned a corner, his breath catching in his chest. The street ahead was empty. He let out a shaky sigh of relief. But the sound didn't go away. It seemed to be pacing him, a block or two behind, a predatory growl in the suburban quiet. He risked a glance over his shoulder. At the far end of the street, a single headlight cut through the twilight. A black chopper, rolling slowly, deliberately. The rider was a dark silhouette. Leo's blood ran cold. He turned his gaze forward and focused on the entrance to Elm Grove Park, a shortcut to his apartment complex. The park was his goal, a small island of green he had to cross. As he reached the edge of the park, the rumbling behind him was joined by another. Then a third. They were a pack now, hunting. He didn't run. He couldn't. His leg throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. He pushed open the creaking iron gate and entered the park, the path disappearing into the deepening shadows of the old oak trees. The playground was deserted, the swings swaying gently in the evening breeze like tiny ghosts. He was halfway across when he stopped dead. From behind the thick hedges lining the path, figures emerged. Leather jackets, heavy boots, the glint of steel. They stepped out to block his path. At the center, his arms crossed over his chest, stood Razor Rex. His face was twisted into a triumphant, cruel smirk. Leo slowly turned. Behind him, at the park entrance, the motorcycle riders had dismounted, blocking his only retreat. He was trapped. Surrounded. "Told you we'd meet again," Rex sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Just as Rex took a step toward the terrified boy, a new voice cut through the tense silence. It was calm, low, and carried an absolute authority that made every biker freeze. "I was hoping you'd be this stupid." Every head whipped toward the source of the voice. Leaning against the thick trunk of an ancient oak tree, almost invisible in the deep shadows until this very moment, was Steven Seagal. He hadn't just appeared. He had been there all along, waiting. The appearance of Steven Seagal was like a switch being flipped. The biker's confident, predatory energy faltered, replaced by a tense, confused silence. They had planned this ambush perfectly, cornering a helpless boy in a deserted park. The sudden presence of this imposing, calm figure was a variable they hadn't accounted for. Rex recovered first, his surprise quickly hardening into indignant rage. He had been challenged by this man once today, he wouldn't be humiliated again, not in front of his entire crew. "You again?" Rex barked, stepping forward. "Look around, old man. There's 8 of us and 1 of you. You should have stayed out of it." "He's not alone," Seagal replied, his voice still unnervingly level. He nodded almost imperceptibly toward Leo, who stood frozen behind him. "He's with me." One of the bikers, a lanky man with a jagged scar bisecting his eyebrow, let out a derisive laugh. "You and what army, Grandpa? You gonna bore us to death with philosophy?" He lunged forward, throwing a wild, telegraphed punch aimed at Seagal's head. It was the last mistake he would make that evening. Seagal didn't so much dodge the punch as flow around it. In one seamless motion, he sidestepped, his left hand rising to parry the man's arm, deflecting the blow harmlessly past his ear. Simultaneously, his right hand clamped onto the biker's wrist. He didn't stop the man's momentum, he accelerated it, pulling him forward and off balance. With a pivot of his hips and a sharp, downward twist, Seagal executed a flawless kotegeshi, an aikido wrist-turning throw. The scarred biker let out a choked cry as he was flipped over Seagal's hip, his own forward motion converted into a brutal, spiraling descent. He landed hard on his back, the air exploding from his lungs. The sickening crunch of his shoulder hitting the packed dirt echoed through the quiet park. He didn't get up. 2 more bikers charged from opposite sides, thinking to overwhelm him. The one on the left swung a heavy chain. Seagal moved toward the man on the right, who was swinging a fist. He met the punch with a rising block, his forearm absorbing the impact. Before the man could retract his arm, Seagal's fingers had already locked onto his wrist and elbow. A quick, sharp hyperextension of the joint, and the biker shrieked as a lance of white-hot pain shot up his arm. As the man crumpled, Seagal spun, his body a coiled spring. The chain from the other biker whistled through the air where his head had been a second before. Seagal's hand shot out and caught the chain mid-swing. He yanked hard, pulling the surprised attacker forward, and delivered a devastatingly precise elbow strike directly to the man's solar plexus. The biker folded like a cheap suit, dropping the chain and collapsing to his knees, gasping for air. The remaining bikers hesitated, their bravado evaporating in the face of such cold, brutal efficiency. This wasn't a fight, it was a dissection. Leo, watching from behind a park bench, was terrified but also mesmerized. He had seen action movies his whole life, but this was different. This was real. There were no wasted movements, no taunts, no flashy kicks. Just pure, undeniable cause and effect. A man attacked, a man fell. He saw one of the remaining bikers, a hulking brute with a thick beard, stealthily circle around behind Seagal, pulling a long knife from his boot. Seagal was occupied, fending off another attacker in front of him. The bearded man crept closer, the blade held low, ready for a killing strike. Leo's mind screamed. Fear paralyzed him for a heartbeat, but then another emotion surged through him, stronger and fiercer, loyalty. This man was protecting him. He wouldn't just stand there and watch him die. With a desperate cry, Leo lurched forward and swung his heavy aluminum crutch with all his might. The metal bar connected squarely with the back of the bearded biker's knee. The man roared in pain and surprise as his leg buckled, his lunge turning into a clumsy stumble. The sound was all the warning Seagal needed. He dispatched the man in front of him with a palm strike to the chest that sent him staggering back into a swing set. He then pivoted, his eyes locking onto the now crippled biker with the knife. In 2 quick strides, he closed the distance. He slapped the knife from the man's hand, the blade skittering across the pavement. He grabbed the man by the front of his leather vest, lifted him effortlessly, and slammed him against the thick trunk of an oak tree. The biker's head hit the bark with a dull thud, and he slid unconscious to the ground. Now, only Rex was left standing. He looked at the wreckage of his crew, strewn across the playground like broken toys. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He was a predator who had just discovered he was prey. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape. He saw Leo, vulnerable and exposed. A final, desperate idea formed. He lunged toward the boy. But he never made it. Seagal was on him in an instant, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size. He didn't throw a punch. He simply stepped into Rex's path, his hand striking like a cobra at Rex's collarbone. The precise, nerve-numbing strike sent a shockwave of agony through Rex's body, and his legs gave out from under him. He crashed to the ground, defeated. Silence fell over the park, broken only by the groans of the downed men and Leo's ragged breathing. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the night. The high-low wail of a police siren, growing rapidly closer. Rex, clutching his shoulder, managed to push himself to a sitting position. He glared at Seagal with pure hatred. "The cops, you called the cops." Seagal looked down at him, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I didn't have to," he said. "When you run with a pack of wolves, someone is bound to hear the howling." The first squad car screeched to a halt at the park entrance, its flashing red and blue lights painting the trees in frantic, strobing colors. Rex knew it was over. He had lost. He had underestimated the boy, and he had fatally underestimated the quiet man in the black shirt. As the officers swarmed the park, he looked at Leo, not with anger, but with a chilling promise in his eyes. He had been beaten, but his war was not yet over. The arrival of the LAPD transformed the chaotic scene into a methodical process of containment. Officers, initially tense with weapons drawn, quickly took stock of the situation, one man and a young boy standing, 8 others groaning on the ground. The air buzzed with the crackle of police radios and the clipped, professional language of law enforcement. A veteran sergeant with a weary face approached Seagal. "Gonna need you to explain this, sir." Seagal simply nodded toward Leo, who was leaning heavily on his crutch, his knuckles white. "They ambushed the boy. I intervened." The sergeant's gaze softened as he looked at Leo's terrified but resolute face and his freshly broken cast. He'd seen enough street justice in his 30 years on the force to recognize it. One of the younger officers did a double take, his eyes widening in recognition as he looked at Seagal. "Hey, he started, but Seagal gave a slight shake of his head, cutting him off. He didn't want his name in a report. As the bikers were cuffed and hauled away, Seagal made sure the police had a statement from Leo and Mr. Chen from the comic shop. He wanted a paper trail. He knew that the system was the only cage that could permanently hold animals like Rex. He then insisted on driving Leo and his mother, who had arrived at the scene frantic with worry, back to their apartment. The building was a modest, 2-story structure in a working-class neighborhood, clean but with the clear signs of deferred maintenance. Inside, the apartment was small but immaculate. Photos of family adorned the walls, a testament to the love that filled the space. Leo's mother, Maria, was a proud woman, her face etched with worry but also with immense gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, mister." "You don't have to," Seagal said, his presence filling the small living room. "Your son is a brave kid. He stood up for what was right." He looked at Leo. "Rest that leg. You've earned it." Before leaving, he discreetly gave Maria his private phone number. "If you see or hear anything at all, you call this number. Day or night." He saw the fear still lingering in her eyes and knew this family needed more than just a one-night rescue. They needed a shield. The next 24 hours were a tense, deceptive calm. Seagal used his own extensive network of contacts, old friends in private security, former law enforcement colleagues, and informants who owed him favors, to dig into Rex. What he found was deeply troubling. Rex wasn't just the leader of a local street gang. He was a chapter president for the Iron Skulls, a notorious and violent outlaw motorcycle club with deep ties to organized crime, running guns and drugs up and down the West Coast. The local crew was just the tip of a very dangerous iceberg. Rex's arrest wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be an insult to a powerful and ruthless organization. That evening, the first tremor of the coming earthquake struck. Maria answered her phone to a number she didn't recognize. She said hello, but there was no response. Only the chilling sound of slow, heavy breathing on the other end of the line, followed by a whispered phrase in Spanish that made her blood run cold, "Te estamos viendo." "We're watching you." The line went dead. Panicked, she immediately called Seagal. He listened intently, his jaw tightening. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone. I'm on my way." Seagal knew this was the signal. Rex was out. A man with the Iron Skull's connections and resources wouldn't be held on a simple assault charge, not when there were crooked lawyers and dirty bondsmen on the payroll. He wasn't just out, he was angry, and he would be coming to finish what he started. But he wouldn't go after the man who beat him. He would go after the source of his humiliation, the boy. Seagal didn't drive to the front of Leo's apartment building. He parked 2 blocks away and approached from the rear, moving through the shadows of the back alleys like a ghost. The air was still and quiet, too quiet. He circled the building, his senses on high alert. He noticed it immediately. The phone and cable lines leading to the junction box on the side of the building had been cleanly snipped. They were already here. He drew a heavy, custom-made knife from a sheath at the small of his back, its blade dark and non-reflective. He moved to the back of the building, to the small patio outside the ground-floor apartment where Leo and his mother lived. The sliding glass door was shut, the curtains drawn. A sudden, loud crash echoed from the front of the apartment, the splintering sound of a door being kicked off its hinges. Shouts erupted from within. Maria's scream confirmed his worst fears. Seagal didn't hesitate. He wasn't kicking in a door and announcing his presence. He was an apex predator, and he was entering the hunting ground on his own terms. With a single, powerful kick, he shattered the lock on the sliding glass door, the frame exploding inward. He flowed into the room, a silent storm of vengeance, just as 3 large, hardened men, their faces grim and professional, far different from the street thugs in the park, turned toward the sound, their eyes wide with shock. They had come to terrorize a woman and a child. They had no idea they had just stepped into a cage with a tiger. The interior of the small apartment became a pressure cooker. The air, already thick with the terror of a home invasion, was now charged with the lethal energy of Seagal's entrance. The 3 men in the living room were not Rex's usual crew. They were bigger, their movements more disciplined, their eyes cold and professional. These were enforcers, the true muscle of the Iron Skulls. One held a crowbar, another a length of pipe. The third, a burly man with a shaved head, cracked his knuckles, a cruel smile touching his lips. From the hallway, Razor Rex emerged, his arm in a sling, his face a mask of triumphant fury. "See? I told you I'd be back," he snarled at Maria and Leo, who were huddled in a corner. Then he saw Seagal. His smile vanished, replaced by sheer, undiluted hatred. "You! I'm going to enjoy killing you myself." Seagal ignored him. His focus was on the immediate threats. The man with the pipe swung first, a wide, powerful arc aimed at his head. Seagal didn't retreat. He moved forward, stepping inside the arc of the swing. His left arm shot up, deflecting the pipe, while his right hand, held in a rigid spearhand formation, jabbed directly into the man's throat. The man made a gurgling sound, his eyes bulging as he dropped the pipe and clawed at his neck, unable to breathe. Before the first man had even started to fall, the second, with the crowbar, attacked. Seagal pivoted, using the falling body of the first man as a momentary shield. He grabbed a heavy ceramic lamp from an end table and hurled it at the attacker's face. The lamp shattered on impact, and the man staggered back, momentarily blinded by the flash of pain and ceramic dust. It was all the opening Seagal needed. He closed the distance in a single step, seized the man's arm, and with a brutal twist, dislocated his shoulder and elbow in one fluid, horrifying motion. The crowbar clattered to the floor as the man screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure agony. The third enforcer, the bald giant, was more cautious. He circled, looking for an opening. He was a brawler, relying on brute strength. He lunged, trying to wrap Seagal in a bear hug, to crush him with his superior size. It was a fatal miscalculation. Seagal met the charge, but instead of resisting, he dropped his center of gravity, sinking low and driving his shoulder into the man's midsection. He wrapped his arms around the giant's legs and, with an explosive surge of power, lifted him off the ground and slammed him backward into the wall. The drywall cracked and splintered under the impact. The man's head snapped back, hitting the wall with a sickening thud, and he slumped to the floor, unconscious. The entire exchange had taken less than 10 seconds. Now, only Rex remained. He stood in the hallway, his face pale, his bravado utterly gone. He was alone, his professional muscle lying broken and scattered around the living room. He looked at Seagal, who now advanced on him slowly, deliberately, the dark knife still held loosely in his hand. Fear finally broke through Rex's rage. He turned and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Seagal was on him in 2 strides, grabbing him by the back of his leather vest and spinning him around. Rex swung his good arm wildly, a desperate, clumsy punch that Seagal easily brushed aside. "You came into their home," Seagal said, his voice a low growl, each word dripping with contempt. "You threatened a child." He grabbed Rex's one good arm. Rex struggled, but it was like fighting a machine. Seagal applied pressure with his thumbs to the nerve clusters in Rex's wrist, sending a jolt of agony through his body. He twisted the arm, forcing Rex to his knees. "You wanted to finish this," Seagal hissed, his face inches from Rex's. "Let's finish it." With a final, sharp, and brutally efficient twist, he applied a finishing lock. A loud, wet snap echoed through the silent apartment as the bones in Rex's forearm gave way. Rex screamed, a raw, animal sound of complete and utter defeat, before collapsing onto his side, cradling his now mangled arm. Seagal stood over him for a moment, his chest heaving slightly, the storm of violence beginning to recede. He then turned and walked back into the living room, where Leo and Maria were still pressed into the corner, watching with wide, terrified eyes. The cold, deadly focus in Seagal's expression melted away, replaced by a quiet reassurance. He knelt, making himself smaller, less threatening. "It's over now," he said softly. "You're safe." Just as he spoke, the night erupted with the sound of approaching sirens. But this time, it wasn't just the LAPD. Mixed with the familiar wail were the deeper, more urgent tones of federal vehicles. The front door, already broken, was filled with agents in tactical gear, weapons raised. "FBI. Drop your weapon." Seagal calmly placed his knife on the floor and raised his hands. An agent he recognized, a man named Henderson from the Organized Crime Division, lowered his weapon. Seagal had made a second call after Maria's, one to a contact high up in the bureau. "Looks like you handled the welcoming committee," Henderson said, surveying the scene with a grimly impressed look. He and his team moved in, cuffing the groaning enforcers and a whimpering Razor Rex. "Assault, home invasion, racketeering. We've been trying to get inside the Iron Skulls for years," Henderson explained to Seagal. "This little stunt of his just gave us the key. By attacking this family, he violated about a dozen federal laws. He's not getting out this time. We're taking down the whole organization." Rex was dragged out, his face a mess of tears and sweat. He had come for revenge, to reassert his dominance. Instead, he had single-handedly destroyed his entire empire and lost everything, all because he couldn't stand being defied by a 13-year-old boy. Dawn broke over Los Angeles, a soft, clean light that promised a new day. On the quiet street where Leo lived, the only evidence of the night's violent storm was the boarded-up front door of his apartment and the lingering scent of ozone in the air. The cruisers and federal vans were gone. The chaos had been swept away, leaving behind a profound, almost sacred, silence. Inside, Leo sat at the small kitchen table, a glass of milk untouched in front of him. His mother was on the phone, her voice filled with a relieved, tearful gratitude as she spoke with family. The events of the past 48 hours felt like a surreal dream, a whirlwind of fear and violence that had finally, blessedly, stopped spinning. The local news that morning was filled with reports of a major federal raid targeting the Iron Skulls Motorcycle Club. Chapter houses across the state had been hit simultaneously in a pre-dawn operation. Dozens of arrests were made, and caches of illegal weapons and drugs were seized. The reports credited a long-term investigation and an anonymous tip. The story of a home invasion in the valley was mentioned only as the final trigger, with the hero of the hour described vaguely as a concerned citizen who had subdued the suspects until law enforcement arrived. Seagal's name was nowhere to be found. His shield had protected not only the family, but his own privacy as well. Later that morning, Leo found an envelope that had been slipped under their damaged front door. Inside was a cashier's check for an amount so large it made his mother gasp. It was enough to cover her medical bills for years and to move them to a better neighborhood. There was no name, no note, only the sterile, printed numbers on the check. But they knew who it was from. A week later, Leo, his leg now in a much lighter walking boot, made his way back to Sunset Comics. The shop was as it always was, a quiet haven. Mr. Chin greeted him with a huge, relieved smile. Standing in the same back corner as before, flipping through an old issue of The Punisher, was Steven Seagal. He looked up as Leo approached, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "I came to say thank you," Leo said, his voice steady and clear. The fear that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid confidence. He held out the pristine copy of the Fantastic Four #1. "I want you to have this. You earned it more than anyone." Seagal looked at the comic, then back at Leo. He gently pushed the boy's hand back. "This book represents your family's history and your own courage, Leo," he said, his voice low and resonant. "True strength, the Bushido spirit, isn't about collecting things. It's about protecting them. You protected your mother. You protected your grandfather's memory. You did the hard part. Keep it. Let it remind you of the man you're becoming." He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder. "You're the hero of this story, kid. Never forget that." Leo looked down at the comic, then back up, his eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude. When he looked up again, Seagal was gone. He had slipped out as quietly as he had arrived, a phantom of justice disappearing back into the fabric of the city. Leo stood there for a long moment, the comic held tight to his chest. He felt a profound shift inside him. He wasn't just the boy who got pushed around anymore. He was the boy who stood his ground. The boy who had faced down a monster and, with the help of a guardian angel, had won. He walked out of the comic shop and into the bright California sun, his head held high. Each step he took, though still slightly uneven, was firm, deliberate, and echoed with the quiet power of a survivor. He knew who he was now. And he was no longer afraid. Did you expect that ending? Sometimes, a hero isn't the one in the cape. He's the one who shows up when the world looks away. What do you think truly defines a hero? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And please, comment with respect for everyone's opinion. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true tales of courage.